Hello, welcome to the interview here on France 24. Well, he kept Nicolas Sarkozy cooling his heels for almost 15 minutes on the red welcome carpet at Cannes. But when China's president, Hu Jintao, finally did arrive at last week's G20 summit, he came bearing a stern warning for Europe's leaders, and it was, get your house in order. Now, as the 17-nation Eurozone faces what's perhaps its worst crisis ever, there are those who say that only the fiscally fittest should remain in the Eurozone. But critics say, you know, if you're weak, if you're wishy-washy, get out. Well, my guest today, Cheyenne Valley, who joins me live from London, is a visiting fellow at Bruegel. That is a European think tank that specializes in global policymaking and economic policymaking specifically. Its members include both governments and international corporations. And Cheyenne Valley, you say that this is a moment of truth for the euro area, but not just the euro area, but the European Union as a whole. Tell us a little bit about why. Where exactly is this moment of truth? What are you waiting for?
Well, I think, as you just said, you know, we're reaching a point where all of the economic, financial, and technocratic solutions that we've tried to come up with to mitigate or to provide solutions for us to this crisis have proven ineffective. And we're really now in front of the big decision. Do European governments, do European heads of states decide to take Europe to the next level, or do we stay where we are and do we face the risk of dissolution? And I think this is this very existential question that now Europe is facing, and it is this very existential question that Europe has tried to avoid over the last few months. I think there is no going back now, and this question in the very short term will have to be addressed.
And you know, we heard very clearly at this G20 summit, Nicolas Sarkozy, other European Union leaders saying, look, we want Greece to remain in the zone, but, you know, if the Greek people don't want it, they should get out and get out quickly. But isn't there a great danger for Greece to get out and then have to restructure outside the Eurozone?
No, absolutely. I think creating a precedent for a euro area member to exit would have dramatic consequences. It might happen in the future, but I think if we're not prepared for it, as we are not at the moment, the risk that we will be facing is that financial markets and all economic agents in general will be pricing the risk that this will happen to every single country in the euro area.
So what's the worst?
Up to France, actually.
What's the worst case scenario then? Greece leaves the union, reintroduces its old currency, the drachma, restructures outside the zone. What happens?
Well, if that happens, immediately you will have Portuguese depositors fleeing Portugal and trying to park their money outside of Portugal and possibly in Germany. You will have financial markets completely abandoning to provide credit to any European firm that's not entirely based in a country that they deem perfectly sound, that they expect to stay in the euro area in its final form. So you will have a massive capital flight, which will have extremely disruptive consequences across the euro area, and that will precipitate the entire demise of the euro area and possibly of the European project. So I think, you know, this what looks like a minute choice today, which is, you know, let a country which is about 3% of GDP of the entire euro area out, is actually a much more fundamental question about the future of the euro area.
Now, given that, I mean, you just described some pretty, what sound like pretty catastrophic scenarios, to be frank. Why is it so difficult for Northern European leaders to convince their citizens that it's actually in their interest for Greece to remain in the Eurozone?
Well, because they have to convince them that transfers are going to be something that will continue. This is something that Germany in particular may not be exactly prepared for. Germany has a domestic experience of transfer which hasn't been particularly pleasant, so they don't want to add to their history of domestic transfer another history of European transfers. But I think more importantly, I think European leaders today may lack the resolve that has been at the foundation of Europe over the last 50 years, and that has really been driving most European policymakers. You know, I think we're at this stage where the euro Europe we have now is either too integrated or not enough. And we cannot just stand on the fence as we are now. We either have to go forward or go backward. And I think this is the very question that European policymakers are being asked and that they are trying to avoid answering.
How do you respond to those who suggest what's wrong with having a so-called two-tiered Eurozone? I spoke to one economist recently who said, let's have two Euros, one for the stronger countries, one for the weak countries. It will all work out. It's still the Eurozone.
It will not be the Eurozone. We will have Eurozones with an S. It could possibly work in the future. I'm not quite sure how we move from where we are now to this two-tier euro area. And I think this transition process, which, if you write it in an economic paper, sounds completely painless, in reality could be extremely harmful and disruptive. I'm not saying it will not happen, and maybe this is what should happen over time, but we cannot present this as a free option. It is an option that will be inevitably very costly, and that will ask very fundamental questions to the countries that sit somewhere in the middle. What about France? Will France belong to the euro of the north or the euro of the south? And this is a question that's not straightforward.
A very open question. What's interesting is it seems that a few months ago, Shahin, we were all talking about the so-called peripheral Eurozone countries, the ones on the southern rim. Correct me if I'm wrong, it seems that everyone except for Germany now is peripheral.
No, I think it's just that the crisis has very centripetal forces. It's moving to the core gradually. It's moving to the core because it's not only a crisis of the periphery, it's becoming an existential crisis of the euro area. And it's also moving to the core because of the way we have constructed the assistance mechanism. The way the EFSF is constructed today, almost by default, will bring crisis and will bring contagion to the core of the euro area.
Let me expand on that. You were referring to the European Financial Stability Facility. That's a so-called sort of rescue fund that Europe's trying to build. And it seems like it's much too small to do the job, especially if this spreads to Italy. Is the European Central Bank ultimately the only guarantor of the Eurozone?
I think the ultimate backstop, yes. The ultimate backstop is the European Central Bank, although it likes to repeat that it's not a lender of last resort and that it will not play that role. I think ultimately it will be in the ECB's responsibility to preserve the entire European financial system and to preserve the euro area as a whole. So I have no doubt that at the when the moment of truth comes, and if the ECB is faced with the binary choice of either saving the euro area or just letting it go, it would rather stay the central bank of something as opposed to become the central bank of a non-existent monetary union. And
I'll remind our viewers, we have seen Mario Draghi in his first few days as the new head of the ECB did take sort of an unconventional move. He moved to lower the interest rate. So does that signal, in your opinion, that he's ready to do some more unconventional things, perhaps?
No, I wouldn't read too much in this rate-cutting exercise. It's just, I think that the recent incoming information on the economic cycle justified a rate cut. So I wouldn't read in this rate cut a sign that the ECB and that Mario Draghi in particular is ready to do more at this stage. But more generally, I think the ECB is ready to do more, provided European governments do their part. At the moment, I think the ECB has a number of doubts, and I believe they have reasons to have those doubts. But I think, when the ECB sees that national governments are going in the right direction or moving towards closer fiscal integration, I think the ECB will be ready to play a bridge and to accompany this transition towards a more solid euro area.
Shahin, briefly in the time we have left, austerity, austerity, austerity. Everywhere we look in Europe right now, everyone is tightening their belts. We just saw France come up with its latest austerity measures. Where is the growth going to come from? I mean, is growth going to be totally choked out?
Growth is going to be choked out by these very aggressive austerity measures. They're not so aggressive in France, but they're quite aggressive everywhere else in Europe. What I find worrying is that I think European governments are misreading what financial markets are telling them. Financial markets are not telling them we want more austerity everywhere. What financial markets are telling them is We want a clear and understandable functioning for the euro area and for its budgetary process, which we don't have at the moment. I think we would save a lot of pain and we would save a lot of growth if instead of focusing on austerity and fiscal cuts, we were focusing on improving and enhancing the institutional setup of the euro area. So I think what the European policymakers are doing today is trading their lack of innovativeness and political courage when it comes to European institutional governance and trading that for the easy way out, which is tight fiscal policy.
Are you an optimist? This is my final question to you. Are you optimistic at this point in time, given the fact we're all looking at Italy now as the next big country in the line of fire? Will the Eurozone be able to hold itself together? Are we on the verge of something far worse to come, and maybe even a double-dip recession here in Europe?
A double-dip recession is, in my mind, almost granted at this stage. I think the real question is, are we in front of something potentially cataclysmic with a breakup of the euro? And I think we're close enough to that. I like to remain an optimist and to believe that in the face of such a cataclysmic scenario, European policymakers and European people in general will realize that they all have a vested interest in a better and a stronger Europe. But I think the question is still open at this stage.
I'm going to leave it on that with a slightly dire forecast for maybe a double-dip recession here in Europe. I've been talking today. Shayan Vallée, you've been my guest, visiting fellow at the Bruegel think tank, European think tank, specializing in global economic policy making. And you've been joining us today from London. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on the Eurozone in crisis. And thanks to all of you for watching the interview here on France 24.